What school announcement forever changed every student's life? I was in class doom-scrolling under my desk when Principal Granado announced, "We are in immediate lockdown. This is not a drill. Lock doors, turn off lights, get away from windows. Now." The speed at which everyone moved wasn't normal. Mrs. Spettle dropped her marker and practically dove for the door, slamming the lock. We'd done drills before where kids still whispered and giggled. Not this time. Pop, pop, pop. Not fireworks. Not a car backfiring. Everyone knew that sound from the news, from other schools, from nightmares. Mac was texting his Discord server saying he was going to die a virgin. I couldn't move my fingers to text anyone. Then, a man's voice started shouting deep and commanding. "Drop it! Drop the gun!" That voice. I knew that voice. Dad? What was Dad doing here? He was supposed to be at the PTA meeting in the main office about fundraising. I heard a struggle. Crashing. 2 more pops. Then nothing. Someone in our corner whispered, "Was that Mr. Sorensen?" Mrs. Spettle shushed them, but I'd already heard it. My dad's name. We sat frozen for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Police sirens finally wailed outside. Through the tiny window in our door, I saw officers running past with assault rifles. "Remain in lockdown." Principal Granado came back on, but his voice was broken. Crying. "Police are clearing the building. Do not move. Do not open doors." My phone buzzed. "Mom. Are you okay?" Me. "Yes. Locked down." Mom. "Thank God. Stay put." Me. "Where's Dad?" She didn't answer. Finally, officers evacuated us. Single file, hands visible, eyes forward. Walking through the halls, bullet holes in lockers, shattered trophy case, blood on the floor near the main office. A man's shoe in the middle of it. Brown loafer. Dad wore brown loafers, so I clocked that. On the football field, parents pressed against police tape, screaming names. I saw Mom and she looked destroyed. An officer was walking me to her when Principal Granado intercepted us, his white shirt splattered with blood. "Julia, come with me first." "I need to see my mom. Please." His voice cracked. He led me to an ambulance where Mom was sitting on the bumper, a paramedic holding her shoulders as she rocked back and forth. When she saw me, she let out a sound I'd never heard before. "Where's Dad?" I asked. Principal Granado knelt in front of me. "Your father was in my office when the shooter entered. He charged them, fought them, got the gun away. Where is he?" My voice sounded far away. "He saved us all, Julia. Me, the secretary, the guidance counselor. But he was shot. Twice. Julia, your dad didn't make it." The world tilted. I was screaming. "Who did it? Who shot my dad?" Mom pulled me against her, but I fought her off. "Who was it?" The principal exchanged looks with the officers nearby. The paramedic turned away. They all knew. "Tell me!" I was hitting Granado's chest, his bloody shirt. "You were there! You saw them! Julia, stop!" Mom sobbed. "It was a student," Granado said carefully. "The police have them. That's all." "What student? What's their name?" Everyone went quiet. Even the chaos around us seemed to pause. Granado looked at Mom. Mom shook her head violently. "She'll find out," he said quietly. "Everyone will know by tonight." "Not now," Mom begged. "Please, not like this." "Tell me now!" I screamed so loud that other parents turned to stare. They had to sedate me. The needle went in while I was still fighting, still demanding a name. The last thing I heard was Mom saying, "Don't let her find out." Not yet. I woke up in the hospital with my mom in the chair beside me and my brother Evan standing by the window. They both had been crying for hours. "Who was it?" My throat was raw. Mom's face crumpled. Evan turned away. "Mom, who killed Dad?" "Everyone knows who murdered my father but me." Principal Granado appeared in the doorway holding an envelope. Behind him, 2 police officers waited. Mom stood up immediately. "Don't you dare. The investigators are done with it," Granado said quietly. "She has a right to know. Before it's on the news. Before the whole school starts talking. She's sedated, traumatized." "I'm right here." I tried to sit up but the room spun. "Give it to me. Whatever that is, give it to me." Granado approached slowly, the envelope shaking in his hands. "The shooter wrote this, before the police found it in his backpack." Granado placed the envelope on my bed and left too, closing the door. 3 pages fell out. A manifesto in cramped handwriting about pain, invisibility, revenge, about making them pay, about being ignored, mocked, unseen. My hands started trembling. I knew this handwriting. I'd seen it on calculus homework we did together, on the Valentine's card in my locker, on the I love you note from last week. The last line, "Julia is the only light in this hell, the only one who saw me. I'm sorry you'll hate me. Otto." My boyfriend Otto. I knew what I had to do. I woke up with afternoon sun coming through the hospital blinds, the kind of light that made everything look washed out and fake. Mom was asleep in the chair next to my bed, her face all puffy and red from crying, and for maybe 3 seconds I didn't remember why we were here. Then it all came back. Dad, Otto, the manifesto with my name in it. My hands were shaking, but my head felt clearer than it had since they sedated me on the football field. I knew what I had to do even though it scared me more than anything. I had to tell the police everything. Every text message, every note Otto left in my locker, Every weird thing he said that I brushed off because I thought he was just stressed. I couldn't hide from this. Dad died stopping Otto, and I owed it to him to help them understand what happened, even if it meant everyone would see our private conversations and judge me for not seeing the signs. Mom stirred in her chair and opened her eyes, looking at me like she was checking to make sure I was still real. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. We just sat there in the hospital quiet with machines beeping down the hall. That evening, a detective showed up. Tall guy in a wrinkled suit who looked like he hadn't slept in days either. He asked for my phone and all the messages between me and Otto. I felt this wave of anger rise up in my chest like he was asking me to hand over my diary. Like those messages were the one private thing I had left in a world where everyone knew my boyfriend shot my dad. But then I remembered what Principal Granado told me. Dad charged at Otto. Dad fought him. Dad saved people. Privacy died the moment those shots went off in the main office. The detective was watching me, waiting, and I could see Mom tense up in her chair like she wanted to tell him to leave me alone. I reached for my phone on the side table before she could say anything. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The detective took it carefully and pulled out a plastic evidence bag, the kind you see on crime shows, and that's when it really hit me that I was part of a criminal investigation now. I agreed to give a formal statement tomorrow and watched him seal my phone in the bag with a label and everything. Mom stood up fast. She started to say something about me being traumatized and needing rest, but I cut her off. They were going to see those messages eventually, I told her. I'd rather give them willingly than have it look like I was hiding something. The detective nodded and said that was smart, that cooperation would help everyone understand the full picture. Mom sat back down hard, her mouth in a tight line, but she didn't argue anymore. After the detective left, she just stared at the wall. I knew she was mad at me for not letting her protect me, but I also knew she understood why I did it. We were both trying to survive this in our own ways. That night back home, Mom tried to take my laptop. She said the news coverage would destroy me and I needed to focus on healing, not reading what strangers were saying online. I snapped at her that I wasn't a child anymore, and she couldn't protect me from reality. My voice came out louder than I meant it to, and Evan stuck his head in from the hallway, looking worried. Mom's face crumpled like I'd slapped her. Part of me felt bad, but a bigger part was angry that everyone kept trying to shield me from things I was going to find out anyway. The truth was, I was scared. I was so scared of what people were already saying about me online, about whether they thought I knew, about whether they blamed me. But I couldn't admit that to Mom, because then she'd take the laptop for sure, and I'd feel like a little kid who couldn't handle the world. So I kept my face hard, and she eventually left my room with the laptop still on my desk. I heard her crying in the kitchen later. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep, so I snuck into Evan's room and took his phone while he was passed out. My hands were shaking as I opened his browser and searched for news about the shooting. A student journalist had posted an article naming Otto as the shooter. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up right there on Evan's floor. Now everyone knew. The whole school. The whole town. Maybe the whole country by tomorrow. I scrolled down to the comments and that's when it got really bad. People were already connecting dots. Someone wrote about seeing Otto and me together in the hallway last week. Another person asked if I knew anything. A third comment said it was weird that the shooter's girlfriend's dad was the one who stopped him. Like maybe that meant something. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I kept reading, torturing myself with every new comment that appeared. I went back to my room and found my own phone, the one the police had photographed and returned. It was blowing up with messages. Some people were asking if I was okay, sending heart emojis and saying they were praying for me. But others were different. Someone I barely knew from English class wrote asking how I could not have seen it coming. Another person, a guy from the soccer team, sent a message saying they trusted me and now people were dead. Each message felt like a punch. I kept scrolling, reading them all even though each one made me feel worse. There were so many. My phone kept buzzing with new ones, the screen lighting up over and over in the dark. I felt like I was drowning in accusations I couldn't answer yet because I didn't even know the answers myself. How was I supposed to know Otto was planning this? What signs did I miss? The questions spun in my head until I wanted to scream. Lying there in the dark hospital room where they'd kept me for observation, I kept replaying last week. Otto had left a note in my locker saying he loved me. I remembered opening it between classes, smiling at his messy handwriting, feeling warm inside because he'd taken the time to write it instead of just texting. Now I was torturing myself, going through every conversation we'd had in the past month, looking for signs I should have seen. He'd been quieter lately, more intense when we talked about stuff. But I thought he was stressed about college applications. Everyone was stressed about college applications. How was I supposed to know he was planning to bring a gun to the school and shoot people? How was I supposed to know he was writing a manifesto with my name in it? The guilt sat on my chest like a weight, making it hard to breathe. Maybe if I'd asked more questions. Maybe if I'd noticed he was pulling away from other people. Maybe if I'd been paying better attention instead of worrying about my own stuff. The next morning, Mom and I got into a huge fight about Dad's funeral. She wanted a closed casket. I needed to see him one more time. She said it would be too hard, that I should remember him the way he was. I said I couldn't say goodbye without seeing him. We were both crying and yelling in my hospital room until a nurse knocked on the door to check if everything was okay. After the nurse left, we kept fighting, but quieter. Mom said she was trying to protect me from more trauma. I said I was already traumatized and seeing Dad couldn't make it worse. Finally, I realized we were fighting because it was easier than sitting with the grief that was crushing both of us. It was easier to yell about funeral arrangements than to admit that Dad was really gone, and neither of us knew how to keep living without him. We ended up just crying together, not solving anything, both of us broken in our own ways. Later that day, someone from the school district called. They assigned me a trauma counselor and scheduled an appointment for this afternoon. Mom took the call and agreed to everything without asking me first. When she told me, I said I didn't want to talk to some stranger about my feelings when my dad was dead and my boyfriend killed him. Mom said it was required, that the school wouldn't let me come back without it. I was too exhausted to fight about it. I just nodded and stared at the wall. What was I supposed to say to a counselor anyway? That I loved someone who turned out to be a monster? That I missed Otto even though I hated him? That I couldn't stop seeing Dad's brown loafer in the middle of all that blood? None of it made sense, and talking about it wasn't going to make it make sense. That night I had a nightmare. I was back in class and heard Principal Granado's voice on the intercom saying we were in lockdown. Then the pops, 3 of them, echoing down the hallway. Then Dad's voice shouting for Otto to drop the gun. In the dream, I could see it happening even though I'd been locked in the classroom. I saw Dad charge at Otto, saw the struggle, saw everything. I woke up screaming so loud that nurses came running into my room. They turned on the lights and one of them sat on the edge of my bed asking if I was okay, if I knew where I was. I couldn't stop shaking. My whole body was shaking like I was freezing even though the room was warm. They gave me something to help me sleep, a little pill in a paper cup. I took it, but I was afraid to close my eyes again. Afraid of seeing Dad's face. Afraid of seeing Otto's face. Afraid of the sound of those pops that I couldn't get out of my head no matter how hard I tried. They finally let me go home on day 3, and by the time we pulled into our driveway that morning, news vans were already parked along our street. Mom saw them through the windshield and her whole body went stiff. She drove past our house twice before parking in the garage, closing the door fast behind us like we were escaping something. Inside, she went from room to room pulling curtains and blinds shut, moving quick and jerky like someone was chasing her. The living room got dark first, then the kitchen, then the den. I followed her around watching her hands shake on each cord. Our house felt like a cave within 20 minutes, all the windows covered, only the overhead lights keeping us from total darkness. I stood in the hallway watching Mom check the front door lock 3 times, and I realized what she was doing. She was trying to build a wall between us and what happened. Like if she could just block out the cameras and the reporters, we could pretend none of this was real. But I could still hear them outside. Voices calling questions we couldn't answer. Van doors sliding open and shut. We couldn't hide forever, and both of us knew it, even if Mom wasn't ready to admit it yet. My phone started buzzing around noon. I'd left it off since the hospital, but Evan brought it to me saying the detective needed to reach me. The second I turned it on, notifications exploded across the screen. Instagram, Snapchat, even my email. I opened Instagram first and my hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. Anonymous accounts, burner profiles, people I didn't even know. The messages said I must have known what Otto was planning, that I probably encouraged him, that I was just as guilty. One message said, "You inspired a monster," and another said, "How many people died because you loved him?" And I felt my stomach twist. I ran to the bathroom and made it just barely before I threw up everything I'd eaten that morning. Mom found me on the floor by the toilet, still holding my phone, messages still coming in. She took the phone away and helped me up, but I could see more notifications lighting up the screen in her hand. People were saying I was responsible for their trauma, that I should have seen the signs, that loving Otto made me part of what he did. Mom wanted to turn the phone off again, but I told her the detective needed to reach me, so she just put it on Do Not Disturb and gave it back. The detective showed up that evening with a folder under his arm and tired eyes. He sat at our kitchen table across from me and Mom while Evan stood by the counter. The detective opened his folder and said Otto had no prior violent record, no disciplinary actions at the school, no red flags in any file they could find, nothing that predicted he would do this. He looked at me when he said it, waiting. Then he asked if I could help provide context about Otto's state of mind lately, anything that might explain what happened. I felt this horrible pull in my chest, like I was being split in 2 directions. Part of me wanted to help, wanted to give them anything that might make sense of this nightmare. But another part felt like I was betraying Otto by analyzing him like a case study, picking apart someone I loved to find the broken pieces. Mom jumped in before I could answer, saying I was still processing trauma and couldn't be expected to provide psychological analysis. The detective said he understood, but any detail could help, and he kept looking at me like I held answers I didn't have. I told him Otto had been quieter lately, more intense when we talked, but I thought it was stress about college applications. The detective wrote that down and asked more questions, but I didn't have better answers. When he finally left, I felt exhausted and guilty, and still just as confused as before. That night, I was lying in bed staring at my ceiling when I remembered Otto's hoodie, the gray one with the school logo that he'd left at my house last week after we studied for calculus. It was still in my closet where I'd hung it, and there was a note in the pocket. I'd found it that day and read it and put it back. Some silly thing about how he loved spending time with me. My heart started racing because that note was evidence now. It might explain something. It might make this worse. I got up and opened my closet, and there it was, exactly where I'd left it. I pulled the note from the pocket and read it again by my phone's flashlight. Julia, every moment with you makes the rest of it bearable. You're the only good thing. Love, Otto. My hands were shaking holding it. This could be important. The police needed to see it, but it was also the last private thing I had from him. the last piece that was just hours before everything exploded. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on my bed holding the hoodie and thinking about what I had to do. The next morning I found Mom in the kitchen making coffee she wasn't drinking, just holding the mug and staring out the window at the news van still parked outside. I told her about the hoodie and the note. I said we needed to give it to the detective even though every part of me wanted to keep it private, wanted to protect that one last piece of Otto that wasn't evidence or testimony or proof. Mom's face went hard. She said it was personal property and we didn't have to volunteer it, that the police had enough already, that I needed to think about protecting myself instead of helping them build their case. I said hiding evidence made me look guilty. She said turning over everything made me look complicit. We were both standing in the kitchen, voices getting louder, and I realized we were about to have the fight that had been building since I woke up in that hospital bed. I started screaming that I wasn't protecting a murderer. Mom screamed back that she was protecting her daughter. I said the hoodie was evidence and we had a responsibility to turn it over. She said the police would twist anything I gave them and use it against me in ways I couldn't predict. I grabbed the hoodie from where I'd left it on the counter and held it up. Mom tried to take it from me. We were both crying and yelling and pulling at the fabric and neither of us was wrong, but neither of us was completely right either. Finally, I just walked out the front door past the news vans with the hoodie in my arms and drove to the police station myself. Mom followed in her car, still yelling at me through my window at red lights. The detective met us in an interview room, and I handed over the hoodie and the note. Mom sat beside me with her arms crossed, furious. Then the detective said there was something else I needed to hear. He pulled out his laptop and played a voicemail Otto had left on the school's main line 2 days before the shooting. Otto's voice came through the laptop speaker, stilted and rehearsed like he was reading from a script. He apologized in advance for what he was about to do, said he was sorry for the pain he would cause, that he couldn't see another way. Hearing his voice again made my chest hurt so badly I couldn't breathe right. That was the voice that told me he loved me. The voice that laughed at my jokes. The voice that whispered in my ear during movies. Now it was apologizing for murder on a recorded line, and I had to sit there and listen to every word while the detective watched my face for reactions. On day 5, the detective took me to the school for a walkthrough. They'd cleaned up some, but the building still felt wrong, empty and damaged. We walked through the main hallway and I saw the trophy case still shattered, lockers with bullet holes. Then the detective played body cam audio through his phone. Dad's voice came through, commanding and strong. "Drop it! Drop the gun!" I heard the struggle, the crashes, then the pops. The pride I felt hearing Dad's courage crashed into the horror of knowing what happened next, and my legs just stopped working. I had to sit down right there in the hallway, back against the lockers, because I couldn't stand anymore. A victim advocate who'd come with us knelt beside me and started talking me through breathing exercises. Then they showed me the evidence bag with Dad's brown loafer inside, the one I'd seen in the middle of the blood that first day. Up close I could see the dark stains on the leather, could see where it had been tagged and photographed. I completely broke down, sobbing so hard they had to help me stand and walk me outside. The victim advocate sat with me on the curb and taught me grounding techniques. Press your feet into the ground. Name 5 things you can see. The concrete, the flagpole, a bird, a car, the sky. 4 things you can touch. The curb, my jeans, the grass, my phone. 3 things you can hear. Traffic, wind, my own breathing. It helped enough that I could stand again, could walk back to the detective's car without collapsing. Principal Granado asked to speak with me privately before I left. We went to a conference room that still smelled like cleaning products, and he closed the door. He sat across from me and said he felt guilty for surviving when Dad didn't. That Dad had charged at Otto to protect him, to protect everyone in that office, and he was alive because my father died. He told me there were gaps in his memory from the trauma, whole minutes he couldn't account for, moments that just disappeared. He looked broken sitting there, this man who was supposed to have all the answers, and I realized the adults were just as shattered as I was. Nobody knew how to fix this. Nobody knew what came next. We were all just trying to survive each day and failing at it in different ways. That night, I sat at my desk with a blank piece of notebook paper in front of me and started writing to Otto even though I'd never send it. My hand shook so badly the letters came out messy, but I kept going, telling him I hated him for what he did to Dad, to our family, to everyone. I wrote that he destroyed everything good in my life, and I'd never forgive him for taking my father away. But then my pen stopped because I had to write the other part too, the part that made me feel sick. I wrote that some horrible part of me still remembered the boy who held my hand in the hallway between classes, who brought me coffee when I had early morning calculus, who made me laugh when I was stressed about tests. I didn't know how to make those 2 versions of Otto fit in the same person. The boy I loved and the killer who shot my dad couldn't both be real, but they were. I finished the letter and folded it into tiny squares and shoved it in the back of my desk drawer where no one would ever find it. The next morning, a man called the house asking for Mom, and I heard his voice through her bedroom door, smooth and practiced like a salesman. Mom put him on speaker, and he introduced himself as a victim attorney who specialized in civil cases against shooters' families. He talked about damages and compensation and liability, and I could hear the dollar signs in every word he said. Mom asked questions about timelines and percentages, and what kind of settlement we could expect. I stood in the hallway feeling sick to my stomach because we were talking about putting a price on Dad's life. The attorney said Otto's family had homeowners insurance and possibly other assets we could go after. Mom thanked him and said she'd think about it, but I could tell from her voice she was already interested. After she hung up, I went into her room and told her it felt wrong to profit from Dad's death. She said we'd need the money for my college and Evan's loans and the mortgage, and I knew she was right, but it still made me want to throw up. Later that afternoon, Mom started talking about doing interviews, saying reporters had been calling and maybe we should tell our story publicly. She wanted to go on the local news and condemn monsters like Otto, make sure everyone knew what kind of evil he was. I pushed back hard, saying it wasn't that simple, and we didn't know the whole story yet. Mom's face went red and she accused me of still defending him, of caring more about my dead boyfriend than my dead father. I yelled that trying to understand how this happened wasn't the same as excusing it, that maybe if we understood we could stop it from happening again. She said I sounded like I was making excuses for a murderer, and I screamed that she was making everything black and white when it was all gray and complicated. We both ended up crying in different rooms. The school called that evening about planning a vigil for Dad and the other people who were hurt. The woman on the phone asked Mom if we had preferences about how they handled it, specifically whether they should name Otto or just refer to the incident. Mom said immediately that they should erase his name, never speak it, treat him like he never existed. The woman asked if I agreed, and I sat there on the couch not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted Otto erased from history, wanted to pretend he never existed so I didn't have to explain our relationship. But another part knew that pretending wouldn't change reality, wouldn't make any of this less real. I stayed silent while Mom filled the quiet with more opinions about erasure and moving forward. The woman said she'd take our thoughts into consideration and hung up. Mom looked at me like she was waiting for me to agree with her, but I couldn't. That night, Mac texted me for the first time since the shooting. The message just said people at the school were blaming me, that rumors were spreading I must have known about Otto's plans. He said some kids were saying I probably encouraged him or didn't stop him when I could have. Mac didn't defend me in the text, didn't say he thought the rumors were wrong. He just reported what people were saying like he was a messenger with no opinion of his own. I stared at the message feeling this deep sense of betrayal, because Mac and I had been friends since middle school. We'd sat together at lunch, studied together, complained about teachers together. Now he was telling me people thought I was responsible for their trauma and he wasn't even saying they were wrong. I didn't text him back. I opened my laptop and started writing an email to Otto's mother, even though I knew it was probably a terrible idea. I wrote that I was sorry for her loss too because she lost her son even though he was still alive. I said I didn't think she was a monster, that parents can't always see what's happening in their kids' heads. I told her I was sorry she had to live with what Otto did, sorry people probably hated her for something she didn't do. I wrote that I knew everyone expected me to hate her, but I couldn't hate someone who was suffering just like I was suffering, just in a different way. My finger hovered over the send button for a full hour. I kept thinking about what Mom would say if she found out, how she'd probably ground me or take away my laptop or worse. But I needed this woman to know that not everyone blamed her, that at least one person understood her pain. I hit send before I could change my mind, and then immediately felt scared and relieved at the same time. The detective called the next morning and his voice was sharp and serious. He asked if I'd contacted Otto's family and my stomach dropped because somehow he already knew. I admitted I'd sent an email to Otto's mother and he told me not to contact them again because it could mess up the case. He explained that any communication between us could be seen as witness tampering or could give the defense ammunition they didn't need. I said the email was already sent, and there was nothing I could do to take it back. He sighed and said to not do it again, then hung up. Sitting there with my phone in my hand, I felt this small spark of something like power. Everyone wanted to control how I grieved and who I was allowed to feel sorry for, but I'd made my own choice. It was probably stupid and definitely risky, but it was mine. That afternoon I had my therapy appointment and the counselor asked how I was handling the guilt. I told her I kept thinking about whether my relationship with Otto somehow caused this or could have stopped it. She leaned forward and explained the difference between responsibility and influence, how Otto made his own choices and I couldn't have controlled what he decided to do. She said I could have influence on someone without being responsible for their actions, that loving someone doesn't make you accountable for their violence. It was the first time anyone had given me permission to not carry all of this guilt on my shoulders. She taught me this thing where I imagined putting the guilt in a box and setting it down, just for a minute, just to see how it felt to not hold it. I tried it and felt this tiny bit lighter, like maybe I could breathe a little easier. The relief only lasted a few minutes before the weight came back, but those few minutes mattered. That night I checked my email obsessively, refreshing every few minutes even though I told myself not to expect a response. Around 9, Otto's mother replied. Her message was short and careful, saying she'd like to meet with me privately if I was willing. She suggested a park bench in a town 2 hours away where no one would recognize us. Reading her words made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped my phone. This felt dangerous and necessary at the same time, like we were the only 2 people in the world who understood this specific impossible pain. Everyone else was either a victim or an outsider, but we were both, stuck in this terrible middle space. I wrote back saying yes before I could overthink it. We met on a Saturday morning at a park I'd never been to before. I got there first and sat on the bench watching families play with their kids on the playground. Normal people living normal lives. Otto's mother arrived 10 minutes later, and I recognized her immediately from the one time I'd met her when Otto and I were dating. She looked older now, tired in a way that went deeper than just not sleeping. We both started crying before either of us said anything. She told me she was sorry my father died and I could hear in her voice that she meant it, that this was destroying her too. I said I was sorry her son was facing life in prison, and she broke down harder. We sat there on that bench crying and apologizing for different things, for losses that weren't really comparable but somehow felt connected. She said she kept trying to understand how her boy became capable of this, and I said I was trying to understand the same thing. We didn't solve anything or make anything better, but there was something human in sharing this grief with the only other person who understood how complicated it was. After an hour, we both stood up to leave, and she hugged me tight, and I let her. Then we walked to our cars in opposite directions, and I knew we probably wouldn't see each other again, but I was glad we'd had this one impossible conversation. Before we stood up to leave, Otto's mother looked at me with red eyes and said something that made my stomach drop. She mentioned that Otto had missed a follow-up appointment with the school counselor back in October, some meeting that was supposed to happen after his first session. She thought the school had handled it, figured they'd rescheduled or whatever, but now she was realizing nobody ever called to follow up. The anger hit me fast and hard, this burning feeling in my chest that maybe someone could have stopped this if they'd actually done their job. I didn't say anything to her about it because she looked destroyed enough already, but I filed it away in my brain as something I needed to ask about. We hugged goodbye and walked to our separate cars, and I sat in mine for 10 minutes just gripping the steering wheel and thinking about that missed appointment. That afternoon, the detective called and asked me to come down to the station because he had some information to share. Mom drove me there, and we sat in this bland conference room with beige walls while he laid out a folder on the table. He explained that they'd found threat assessment notes in Otto's school file, concerns from an English teacher about some essays he'd written that had dark themes. The notes were dated from September, marked for review by the counseling department, but they'd gotten buried somewhere in the system and never escalated to anyone who could have intervened. I felt my frustration shift from blaming myself to blaming the system. All these adults who were supposed to be watching and somehow missed every single warning sign. The detective said the school was conducting an internal review, but that wasn't going to bring Dad back or undo what happened. Mom asked if we could sue the school district, and the detective said that was a question for a lawyer, which felt like a yes without saying yes. That night, the school board held this public meeting in the auditorium, and Mom wanted me to stay home, but I insisted on going. The place was packed with angry parents screaming about safety failures and demanding people get fired. One mom stood up and yelled that her daughter still couldn't sleep, that the district had failed to protect their kids, that heads needed to roll. Another dad demanded to know why the threat assessment system existed if nobody was going to use it. I sat in the very back row with my hood up, not ready to perform my grief for this angry crowd that wanted simple answers to questions that felt way more complicated. Principal Granado was up on the stage looking like he'd aged 10 years, and the superintendent kept saying they were investigating and implementing new protocols. It all felt hollow, like closing the barn door after the horses escaped. After the meeting ended, this kid from the school newspaper found me in the parking lot. He introduced himself and made this careful pitch about doing an interview, promising I could review all the quotes before anything got published. He said he knew my story was being told by everyone except me, and maybe I deserved to control my own narrative. I was tempted because I was so tired of other people deciding what the truth was, but I was also terrified of being misquoted or having my words twisted. I told him I needed to think about it, and he nodded and said that was completely fair. He gave me his email and said to reach out if I changed my mind. No pressure, and then he just walked away. That was the first time someone had asked for my story and actually accepted no as an answer, which made me trust him slightly more than I trusted anyone else. The next morning, the detective called again, and this time he walked me through the preliminary sequence of what happened in that office. He said Dad had physically grabbed Otto and disarmed him during a struggle, got the gun away, and had him pinned against the wall. But then Otto managed to get the gun back somehow, and they both ended up on the ground, and that's when Otto shot Dad twice at close range. I felt this weird mix of pride that Dad fought so hard and horror at imagining those final moments. My brain trying to picture it and failing because I didn't want to see it. The detective asked if I was okay, and I said yes, even though I wasn't. And he said he had something else to show me if I was ready. They pulled up a surveillance still from the hallway camera. Grainy black and white image of Dad pinning Otto against the wall with his forearm across Otto's chest. I stared at that photo for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That was my father being a hero and my boyfriend being a killer in the same frame, and my brain kept short-circuiting trying to process how both of those things could be true at the same time. I asked for a copy of the photo, and the detective said he couldn't give me one yet, but I could look at it as long as I needed. After I left the station, I sat in my car and pulled up the student journalist's email on my phone. I wrote him a message saying I'd do an interview but only under my terms. Written questions submitted in advance. Final approval on all quotes, and published under my full name so nobody could say I was hiding. He wrote back within 5 minutes saying he agreed to everything and thanked me for trusting him. It felt like taking back a tiny piece of control in a situation where I had none. That afternoon, the victim attorney called Mom about the civil case, and during the conversation, he warned that Discovery would expose all my text messages with Otto to the public. Mom looked at me while he was talking, and I could see her wanting to protect me from that exposure. But I made a choice right there to be transparent now, rather than have it leaked later and used against me. I told Mom I wanted to own my story before someone else could weaponize it, and she thought I was crazy, but I knew it was the right call. That night, Mom and I had the biggest fight we'd ever had, standing in the kitchen screaming at each other about whether I was allowed to humanize Otto publicly. She said I was betraying Dad's memory by not calling Otto a monster, that Dad died stopping him, and I owed it to Dad to condemn him completely. I screamed back that Dad would want me to tell the truth. The whole complicated truth. Not some simplified version where Otto was pure evil and nothing else. Mom screamed that I didn't get to speak for Dad anymore, that I'd lost that right when I chose to defend the person who killed him. We were both crying and yelling and saying things we couldn't take back, and eventually I just went to my room and slammed the door. I could hear her sobbing in the kitchen, and I was sobbing in my bed, and we were both completely alone in our separate rooms, dealing with the same impossible grief in totally different ways. The next morning, Mom drove me to therapy without speaking, both of us still raw from last night's fight. The counselor's office smelled like lavender and had those generic motivational posters on the walls that usually made me roll my eyes. She had me sit in this oversized chair that swallowed me up and asked how I was doing, which felt like the stupidest question anyone could ask. I told her about the fight with Mom, about how Mom wanted me to hate Otto completely, and I couldn't do that even though I wanted to. The counselor pulled out this worksheet with 2 columns and had me write contradictory truths that were both real at the same time. Otto loved me, and Otto killed people. Dad was a hero, and I'm allowed to grieve my boyfriend too. Otto was kind to me, and Otto caused unimaginable pain. Seeing them written out like that made my brain hurt less somehow, like maybe I didn't have to choose between them. She taught me this grounding technique where I pressed my feet hard into the floor and named 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear. We practiced it over and over until my breathing slowed down and the tightness in my chest loosened a little. She said cognitive dissonance was normal, that my brain was trying to make sense of information that didn't fit together. She gave me a crisis plan card with steps to follow when the contradictions felt unbearable, and I folded it into my pocket like a lifeline. Day 12. The school partially reopened with metal detectors at every entrance and cops stationed in the hallways. Mom wanted to keep me home, but I needed to see it. Needed to walk through those halls and prove to myself I could do it. The accommodation plan said I could leave any class if I got triggered and go straight to the counselor's office, no questions asked. Evan drove me because Mom couldn't handle it, and when we pulled into the parking lot, I saw the news vans were still there. Walking through the front doors felt like entering a crime scene that someone had tried to clean up but couldn't quite erase. The trophy case was boarded up with plywood. The lockers near the main office had been replaced, but you could still see the bullet holes in the wall behind them. Counselors stood at every corner wearing these bright yellow vests like they were directing traffic. I made it to my locker and my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't work the combination. A counselor came over asking if I needed help, and I waved her off because I needed to do this myself. Finally got it open, and just stood there staring at my books like they were artifacts from another life. Made it to first period and sat in my usual seat, pressed my feet into the floor like the counselor taught me. 5 things I could see. Whiteboard, clock, Mac's empty desk, the door, Mrs. Spettle's coffee mug. 4 things I could touch. Desk surface, my jeans, my backpack strap, the pencil in my hand. Made it through the whole period without leaving, and that felt like the tiniest victory. Like maybe I could survive this after all. Between first and second period, I saw Mac in the hallway, and he looked right at me, then immediately turned away. Just completely avoided eye contact like I was invisible or contagious. I heard someone whisper behind me, "That's her," the girlfriend, and my whole body went cold. 2 girls I used to eat lunch with walked past without acknowledging me, and I wanted to grab them and scream that I'm a victim too, that I lost my dad and my boyfriend in the same horrible moment. But I knew some people would never see me as anything but complicit. Like I should have known or could have stopped it. The loneliness crushed down on me so hard I had to lean against a locker to stay upright. A freshman stared at me with this mix of fear and fascination, like I was a museum exhibit about tragedy. I made it to second period and sat in the back corner where I could see the door, which the counselor said was normal for trauma survivors. Spent the whole class feeling like everyone was looking at me even when they weren't. Like my connection to Otto was written across my forehead in permanent marker. After third period, a teacher I barely knew pulled me aside in the hallway and said all my assignments had flexible deadlines, that I should just focus on getting through each day. She was trying to be kind and I appreciated that, but it also made me feel marked as damaged, like I was the broken student who needed special accommodations. I thanked her and felt this weird mix of gratitude and resentment at the same time. Grateful that someone was cutting me slack, but hating that I needed it, hating that everyone could see how not okay I was. Another contradiction to add to my list. I appreciate the accommodation, and I hate the special treatment. The counselor would probably say that's normal too, that grief doesn't follow logic. Made it to lunch and couldn't face the cafeteria, so I ate in my car, scrolling through messages from people I hadn't heard from in weeks, suddenly checking if I was okay. Deleted most of them without responding because I didn't have the energy to perform being fine or being devastated or whatever they wanted from me. Principal Granado found me in the parking lot after lunch and asked if I'd be willing to speak at a staff debrief about my experience. He said it would help teachers understand what students were going through, that my perspective would be valuable. I looked at him standing there in his clean shirt, nothing like the bloody one from that day, and I felt this surge of protectiveness over my own story. I told him no, firmly and clearly, that I wasn't ready to be an object lesson for anyone's healing process. He looked disappointed but nodded and said he understood, that the offer stood if I changed my mind. Walking away from that conversation felt good, like I was learning to protect myself instead of just performing for everyone else's needs. Setting that boundary made me feel slightly more in control, like maybe I could decide what I shared and when I shared it. The counselor had said boundaries were important, that I didn't owe anyone my trauma just because they asked for it. This felt like practicing that, like taking back tiny pieces of autonomy in a situation where I'd had none. That night, I checked my email and found a message from Otto's mother with a photo attached. The subject line said, "I'm sorry for the wait of our meeting." And when I opened it, I saw a picture of Otto as a little kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a soccer uniform and grinning at the camera. His front teeth were missing and his hair was messy, and he looked so normal, so innocent, so incapable of what he'd grow up to do. I stared at that photo for probably 20 minutes, zooming in on his face and trying to see some hint of the violence to come. But there was nothing. Just a regular kid who probably had no idea his life would end up like this. The note from his mother apologized for how heavy our park bench conversation must have been. Said she hoped I was taking care of myself. I felt this deep ache looking at that little boy, knowing he'd grow up to kill my father and destroy so many lives, including his own. No sense of absolution came from seeing the photo, no resolution or understanding. Just this raw grief for everyone involved, for the kid in the photo and the man he became, and the father he took from me. The detective called the next morning and said he wanted to share something with me, asked if I could come to the station. Mom drove me there in silence, and we sat in the same conference room where I'd given my statement. He pulled out a printed excerpt from Otto's manifesto and slid it across the table, pointing to a section I hadn't seen before. It listed specific targets, mostly teachers who'd apparently humiliated him over the years. Mr. Corey, who'd called him stupid in front of the class. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd laughed when he gave a wrong answer. Coach Simmons, who'd cut him from the team. Not students. Not me specifically. The detective said Otto's plan had been focused on those teachers, that the fact he went to the main office first suggested he was looking for administrators. I felt this weird shift happening in my chest, like maybe my attention hadn't caused this after all. Maybe it had just existed alongside his rage, separate from it. Maybe I wasn't the catalyst I'd been torturing myself about. The guilt didn't disappear, but it changed shape, became less about me inspiring violence, and more about me not seeing the signs that were probably there. I spent the afternoon in my room staring at the ceiling and wondering impossible questions. Did my relationship with Otto delay his timeline or divert his anger somehow? Would he have done this sooner if I hadn't been there? Did dating me give him something to hold on to that postponed the violence? Or was I giving myself too much credit, assuming I had that kind of influence over his choices? I couldn't tell if thinking this way made me complicit, or if I was just looking for control in a situation where I'd had none. My therapist would definitely say I was trying to find patterns and meaning where there might not be any, that sometimes terrible things happen without clear causes we can point to. But my brain kept spinning through the what-ifs anyway, trying to construct a version of events where I could have changed something. Tried to do homework but couldn't focus. Ended up just lying there holding Otto's note from my locker, and hating that I still kept it. Late that night, the panic hit me like a wave I couldn't see coming. Started with my chest getting tight and my breathing going shallow, then my hands started shaking and I felt like I was drowning. Grabbed the crisis plan card from my nightstand and forced myself to follow the steps even though every part of me wanted to just spiral. Stumbled to the bathroom and ran cold water over my face, gasping at the shock of it. Counted backwards from 100 out loud, focusing on each number. 99, 98, 97. Texted the crisis line the counselor had given me, and someone responded right away with grounding prompts. Name 5 things you can see right now. Sink, mirror, towel, toothbrush, tile floor. 4 things you can touch. Cold porcelain, wet face, cotton shirt, bathroom counter. Kept going through the exercises until the drowning panic shifted to something more tolerable. Still bad, but manageable. Not okay, but not completely falling apart either. Crawled back into bed, and that felt like progress somehow. Like I'd used the tools instead of just suffering through it. Still felt terrible, but I'd moved from can't breathe panic to regular distress, and the counselor had said that counted as a win. The student article published the next morning, and I made myself read it even though I was terrified. My quotes were there exactly as I'd approved them, talking about grief and confusion and not having easy answers. The comment section filled up fast, and I watched them roll in with my stomach in knots. Some people showed real empathy, said they were sorry for my loss and appreciated my honesty. Others called me attention-seeking, said I was trying to make myself the victim when real victims had died or been traumatized. Someone wrote that I probably knew all along and was covering my tracks with fake grief. Each negative comment felt like a punch, but I kept reading anyway, making myself sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. My nervous system rode the waves of anxiety, spiking with each cruel comment and settling slightly with each kind one. Didn't drown in it, though. Didn't spiral into full panic. Used the breathing techniques and the grounding exercises, and just let the feelings exist without trying to fix them. Closed the laptop after an hour and realized I'd survived it, that I could handle people's judgments without completely falling apart. Took that as a win, even though everything still hurt, even though nothing was resolved. Progress wasn't feeling better. It was just staying present while feeling terrible, and somehow that was enough for today. That night, Mom told me the school board was meeting to vote on a memorial policy and asked if I wanted to watch the live stream. I said no at first, but then changed my mind because I needed to see how they'd handle this. Sat on the couch with my laptop while Mom made tea she wouldn't drink. The board members looked tired and scared, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with the camera. They voted to memorialize victims only with no public mention of the shooter's name in any official materials. The motion passed unanimously, and parents in the audience clapped. I felt this weird mix of relief and sadness because erasing Otto wouldn't erase what happened, but I understood why people needed him to disappear. Mom squeezed my shoulder, and I let her, even though part of me wanted to pull away. Closed the laptop and went to my room where I pulled out a notebook and started writing Dad's eulogy because the funeral was in 2 days and I couldn't let someone else tell his story. Wrote about how he coached Evan's Little League team even though he knew nothing about baseball and made terrible puns that made everyone groan. Wrote about his obsession with grilling and how he'd stand outside in winter with a spatula talking to the burgers. Wrote about the time he cried watching my 8th grade graduation and tried to pretend he had allergies. I wanted people to remember him as human, and not just as a hero because symbols don't leave daughter-shaped holes in the world. Finished writing as the sun came up and my hand was cramping, but I felt like I'd done something right for once. That afternoon, the detective came by to collect Otto's hoodie and all his notes, and I'd already pulled them from my closet. Mom tried to talk me out of it one more time, but I walked past her and handed everything over in a plastic bag. The detective thanked me and said this would help build a complete picture. Letting go of those last physical pieces felt like releasing control and choosing truth over protecting myself. Scared me, but also felt right in a way I couldn't explain. Mom was quiet after he left, and I knew she was mad, but I didn't apologize. Later that evening, she met with the victim attorney in our dining room, and I sat in the kitchen pretending not to listen. Heard words like compensation and damages and negligence, and my stomach turned. The attorney left papers for Mom to sign, and she did it right there with her mouth set in a hard line. I felt uneasy about it, even though I understood we'd have bills and probably therapy costs forever. Our goals were splitting apart, and I could feel it. She wanted justice and money, and I wanted understanding and maybe some impossible version of forgiveness that didn't exist yet. Didn't say anything because what could I say that wouldn't start another fight? The next morning, Principal Granado texted asking if I'd meet him at a coffee shop, and I almost said no, but something made me agree. He was already there when I arrived, looking older than he had 2 weeks ago. We sat outside even though it was cold, and he apologized for that day on the field when I was screaming at him. Said he should have handled it better and he was sorry I found out that way. I told him I was sorry for hitting him and for all the things I yelled. He said he didn't blame me for my rage, and I said I didn't blame him for surviving. And something softened between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe understanding. He bought me hot chocolate, and we didn't talk much after that, but it felt okay to just sit there. My therapy appointment that afternoon introduced new techniques, and the counselor had me close my eyes and imagine a safe place. Described a mental room with thick walls and a door I could lock. Then she had me hold these buzzers that vibrated in alternating patterns while thinking about the trauma. Called it bilateral stimulation, and said it could help process the memories. Felt measured hope that maybe I could live with this eventually. The tools didn't fix anything, but they made the pain slightly more manageable, like turning the volume down instead of off. Practiced the techniques for an hour until my brain felt tired but calmer. That night, I finally messaged Mac to clear the air about the rumors. Asked him straight out if he'd been talking about me, and he took 20 minutes to respond. When he did, he apologized for not defending me when people were saying things. Admitted he was scared of being associated with me and didn't want to become a target too. I appreciated the honesty even though it hurt to know he'd chosen safety over friendship. Told him I understood and meant it because I probably would have done the same thing in his position. We didn't make plans to hang out, but at least the air was cleared. The next morning, I woke up early and grabbed my phone and opened the voice memo app. Started recording everything I needed to say to Otto. Told him I hated him for killing Dad and destroying my family. Told him I was angry he'd put his pain above everyone else's safety. Told him I didn't understand how he could love me and still do this. Talked for 15 minutes until my voice was raw and my hands were shaking. Then I played it back once and deleted it without sending. The release came from saying the words out loud and not from him hearing them. That was enough. Later that afternoon, Otto's mother emailed saying she was moving to another state to escape the threats and harassment. People had spray painted her house and someone threw a brick through her window. Said she couldn't stay in a place where everyone wanted her dead for something her son did. I felt both empathy for her impossible situation and relief that this distance might help both of us heal. Wrote back wishing her luck and meant it because she was suffering too, even if people didn't want to admit it. The detective called that evening while I was eating dinner, and Mom answered, then handed me the phone with a worried look. He told me there was a preliminary hearing date set for next month, and I might be asked to testify about Otto's state of mind and our relationship. The anxiety hit immediately and my chest got tight, but I used the grounding techniques from therapy. Pressed my feet into the floor and counted my breaths and named 5 things I could see. The panic stayed contained instead of spiraling, and I told the detective I'd do whatever was needed. Hung up and sat there feeling proud of myself for using the tools and staying present instead of falling apart. The therapist's office felt smaller than usual when she brought up the preliminary hearing scheduled for next week. She leaned forward in her chair and asked if I'd thought about attending, then immediately followed with her recommendation that I shouldn't go. Watching Otto in court would put me in the same room with him for the first time since everything happened, and my nervous system wasn't ready for that kind of confrontation. She explained that re-traumatization was a real risk, that seeing him in handcuffs and prison clothes might undo weeks of progress with the grounding techniques and crisis management tools. I sat there pressing my feet into the floor and counting my breaths, using the exact techniques she'd taught me, and realized I didn't want to go anyway. Choosing not to attend wasn't weakness or avoidance. It was protecting myself from something I genuinely wasn't ready to handle. I told her I'd skip it, and felt this weird relief, like giving myself permission to prioritize my healing over some idea of what I was supposed to do. The student journalist texted me that afternoon asking for comment on the upcoming hearing, probably hoping for some dramatic quote about facing Otto in court. I typed out a polite decline and hit send without the usual anxiety spiral about whether I was making the right choice. Each time I said no to something that didn't serve me, the decision got a little easier, like I was learning to trust my own judgment instead of constantly second-guessing myself. He responded with a simple acknowledgement and didn't push, which made me respect him more than if he'd tried to convince me. Mom picked me up from therapy and drove us to the school for the memorial unveiling, and I could see the news vans already parked along the street. The main hallway had been blocked off with temporary barriers, and a small crowd gathered near the trophy case, where they'd installed a bronze plaque with Dad's name. Principal Granado stood beside it looking older than I remembered, and Evan waited by the water fountain with his hands shoved in his pockets. Mom squeezed my hand as we walked up, and I felt this quiet sorrow mixed with gratitude that Dad had a place now where people could direct their grief. The plaque listed his name, the date, and a simple inscription about courage and sacrifice, and I traced the letters with my fingers while people took photos. Evan put his arm around my shoulders and we stood there together, not saying anything, just existing in the weight of it. People needed this memorial, needed somewhere physical to process what happened, and now they had it even if it couldn't bring Dad back or make sense of any of this. That night, Mom made pasta, and we sat across from each other at the kitchen table in tense silence, both of us exhausted from the memorial and everything else. She started talking about grief counselors and support groups, and I could feel us heading toward another fight about how we were each handling things differently. I stopped her and suggested we needed some ground rules instead of constantly battling over whose approach was right. We spent an hour negotiating boundaries, agreeing that we'd both stay in therapy, no TV news allowed in the house, and we'd try to respect each other's different grieving styles even when we didn't understand them. It wasn't harmony or some beautiful mother-daughter healing moment, just a practical truce that gave us both room to breathe. Mom agreed to stop trying to control my every move, and I agreed to keep her informed about major decisions, and we shook hands across the table like we were signing a treaty. The next morning, I wrote a letter to Otto's mother on plain notebook paper, thanking her for meeting with me at the park, and wishing her peace in whatever new life she was building. I kept it short and respectful, making it clear I wasn't expecting a response, and that reaching out was about my own healing process. Sealing the envelope felt significant, like I was releasing something I'd been carrying, and I walked it to the mailbox on the corner before I could change my mind. The act of sending it mattered more than whether she ever read it or wrote back, and I felt lighter walking home. That afternoon, I returned to calculus class for the first time since the shooting, and the moment I walked through the door, I saw Otto's empty desk in the third row. My chest tightened immediately, and the classroom started feeling too small, too bright, too full of memories of us doing homework together. I pressed my feet into the floor and started naming things I could see, using the grounding tools my therapist had drilled into me and breathed through the panic instead of running out. The teacher gave me a concerned look, but I nodded that I was okay, and I stayed in my seat for the entire class period. Coping in place instead of avoiding felt like real progress, like I was learning to exist in uncomfortable spaces without falling apart. That evening, I sat in the therapist's office and outlined my ongoing plan with her, making it concrete and specific instead of vague intentions. I'd testify truthfully if called to the stand at Otto's trial, continue therapy twice a week for the foreseeable future, limit social media to protect my mental health from the constant commentary, and focus on graduating high school. The plan was sober and steady, built on small, sustainable steps instead of dramatic gestures or impossible goals. She helped me write it down in my journal so I could reference it when things felt overwhelming, and we discussed what to do if any part of it stopped working. At dusk, I walked out to the football field where we'd evacuated that day, the grass still damp from afternoon rain. I stood near the 50-yard line and remembered Dad without trying to resolve the impossible contradictions of loving Otto and hating what he did. The cool air filled my lungs, and I let myself exist in the uncertainty, knowing some questions don't have answers and some wounds don't fully heal. I was still here and still breathing and carrying all of it, the grief and the love and the anger and the confusion, and that was enough for today. That's where we'll wrap things up today. I'm really happy you were here because it makes telling these stories feel worthwhile. I hope it added something kind or gentle to your day. Subscribe if you want to keep building this little space with me.